Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Heather Woodbridge, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this event, one in a series of webcasts commemorating the history of the battleship cruiser HMS Hood, its crews, and the memories of the people intimately associated with the vessel. This commemoration has been organised by the group Another Orkney Production as part of their annual Celebrating Scapa Flow event. And the Orkney International Science Festival is proud to be able to assist with the live webcasting of the online programme this weekend. It is my pleasure this afternoon to introduce your speaker for today, Ian Johnston. Ian is a renowned maritime historian and an author of a number of books in this subject. And if you have any questions or comments for our speaker during the presentation, please enter them into the YouTube live chat and we will get back to them at the end of Ian's presentation. Well, I think that's enough from me, and I'd just like to say welcome, Ian, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Heather, for that introduction, and greetings everyone from Glasgow. And thank you very much indeed for joining me in this talk about the origins of HMS Hood, seen here next in this photograph at the very beginning of her career. Next. And again, at the very end, and this probably the last photograph ever taken of her. Before we get to the build sequence of the photographs, however, I would like to talk a little bit about the overall context which gave rise to Hood, and talk a little bit about what a battlecruiser was, a little bit about the Anglo-German naval race of which Hood was a part, and so on. Next. But first of all, I would like to say just a little bit about the battlecruiser, and I will be chopping and changing from one subject to the other before we get to the sort of main sequence, which is the photographs of her construction. So first of all, the battlecruiser was a completely new type of warship and was conceived by Jackie Fisher. And here you see one of the very first vessels of this type, HMS Inflexible, which appeared in 1908. And the key to the battlecruiser was the whole issue of speed, while still carrying a very heavy main armament. So speed was the essence of what the battlecruiser was all about. And this gave rise to a number of issues. Next. If we look at the battleship, and here is the very familiar to people from Orkney, Royal Oak, which was a state-of-the-art battleship in 1916. But if we compare that to a battlecruiser, next, in scale, you can see just how much bigger the battlecruiser was. And the reason for this, next, is the whole issue of speed and the amount of steam required to drive the turbines to make this extra speed. Next. If we look at the internal makeup of the Royal Oak, and we can see the number of boiler rooms and the engine room, and we compare that to Repulse, next, then you can see the huge additional space required in the hull for the extra boilers and the larger engines required to drive this ship at an additional 10 knots. So that probably, in a sense, explains that the fundamental reason for why the battlecruiser was such a larger ship, much more impressive in many ways, and very quickly warmed themselves to the hearts of the British public. Next. The one downside was that while the battleship, could you go back one, please, John? While the battleship was very heavily armored, then the battlecruiser was lightly armored, and it was seen that speed was really part of its defense, getting out of the way quickly. Next. Over the 10 years, which from the design of the first battlecruiser in 1906 to the appearance of Hood, the type evolved very quickly indeed, almost doubling in terms of its displacement tonnage, and becoming from, or starting off as a rather ungainly looking ship to the very handsome, beautiful lines of HMS Hood and Repulse and so on. So a little bit more now about the Anglo-German naval race. Next. And this naval race, of which Hood was probably the last British warship built as part of that race, was all because of the rise of Germany as a naval power. Now, Germany, of course, was united as a country in 1871, but it wasn't until Kaiser Wilhelm II came to power in 1888, and he was, of course, the grandson of Queen Victoria. He was hugely impressed by the British fleet, that he decided that Germany, hitherto a large land power, but not a naval power, should have a very large navy, and one which could perhaps not rival the British fleet, but take it on and do it some damage, as it were. So through Admiral von Tirpitz, who was the head of his Admiralty, he formulated a series of laws which enabled the German Navy to become very much larger in size. Next. And particularly from 1906 onwards, when the British battleship Dreadnought appeared, the Anglo-German naval race began in earnest. Next. Now, I wouldn't bother reading all the names to the left and right of this, just let the visual massive type tell the story here, the British on the left and the Germans on the right-hand side. Next. Really, there was no contest. Over those 10 years, in Britain, 50 dreadnought-type battleships and battlecruisers were built, where the Germans could only manage 24. And last of the British ones, of course, was HMS Hood. So she, in a sense, brought this naval race to an end. Next. A little bit about the Royal Navy in 1918, just to give some indication of the service to which HMS Hood was going to be part. And the numbers, I think, speak for themselves here. 558 warships of all types and similar number of auxiliaries, 415,000 men employed at sea, and a staggering 408,000 people employed in the private shipyards in Great Britain. Lucky today if there's 8,000 or perhaps 10 at a pinch. Next. A little bit now about the Admiralty, because Hood was commissioned by the Admiralty, first of all as a design, and the principal people who were involved in this process are the top three in the Admiralty, the First Lord, the First Sea Lord, and various other Sea Lords, but including the Third Sea Lord, who was responsible for ships and so on. When it came to the design of ships, and these were the responsibility of the DNC, the Director of Naval Construction, and he had a team of people working from him. This was all done in London. The Director of Naval Ordnance would have an important say, as would the Engineer-in-Chief. Next. So the timeline to the keel laying of HMS Hood in 1916 was as follows. Next. On the 8th of March, the Admiralty request the preparation of the design for a new battlecruiser. Next. 7th of April, the design is approved. Next. On the 11th of April, the First Lord meets with the Chancellor of the Exchequer to say, can we have the money for this to build these ships? And he says, yes. Next. And on the 13th of April, the Third Sea Lord places the orders for 3 battlecruisers with 1 to follow. And these, of course, are the ships of which Hood is one. Next. And these are the 4 ships which will comprise what was termed as the Admiral class or the Hood class of battlecruisers, 4 of them. Next. Then, on the 31st of May, the Battle of Jutland took place, and that would have significant consequences. Next. Because 3 major British warships were lost with an appalling loss of life, but all 3 ships were battlecruisers. And this, of course, had great implications for the ones which we had just authorized. Next. Vice Admiral David Beattie, who was in charge of our battle cruisers at the Battle of Jutland, famously said, "There seems to be something wrong with our bloody ships today," and indeed there was. Next. And the pressure on Eustace Tennyson Dynecourt, who was the director of naval construction, must have been intense, because he and his team had just designed these 4 new battle cruisers, and we had just lost 3, which were very, very similar in concept. So he must have had some agonizing moments, just wondering what the heck was going to happen next and what should he do next. Returning to the timeline for HMS Hood, with the Battle of Jutland having taken place, bureaucracy still continued, and John Brown was advised that their ship, which they had given the shipyard number 460, was to be named Hood. Next. And on the 1st of September, the keel plates for Hood were finally laid down at Clydebank. Next. A little bit about John Brown and Co., the shipbuilders. Probably even by this stage, the most famous shipyard in the UK. John Brown, of course, would go on to build the Queen Mary and the Queen Elizabeth and the QE2, but even in those years before World War I, they had built the Aquitania, one of the largest ships at sea. Next. The famous Lusitania. Next. And of course, a host of warships for the Royal Navy, including HMS Barham, seen here in the fitting out basin at Clydebank as part of this general build-up in the Anglo-naval race, the Anglo-German naval race. Next. So when the order for HMS Hood was placed at John Brown, they employed approximately 10,000 people. And the wage bill for the week beginning the 2nd of May 1916 was just over £24,500. Quite interesting numbers comparing those of what you might expect today. Next. So the changes that were made to HMS Hood as the keel plates lay on the slipway at Clydebank as a consequence of Jutland were as follows. Next, and here is a section through the ship, through the midships section. Next, and the idea here is just to show you where the changes would take place. HMS Hood had what was termed protective deck plating on a number of decks. Next, she had side armor, an armor belt in 3 different tiers. Next. And she had this rather large bulge which extended for almost all of the hull. And that was there to deflect, or rather not to deflect, but to absorb the explosive force of a torpedo should she be hit by a torpedo. Next. Above decks, the turrets were armored, as were the barbettes which supported the turrets. Next. So what happened as a consequence of the design changes was that the 3 tiers of armor running down the side of the ship were changed from 3, 5, and 8 inches to, next, 5, 7, and 12. Next. The above decks armor on the barbette and on the turrets themselves was increased from what you see there to, next, 5, 12, and 12 inches, and 15 at the front of the turrets. Next. But all of this led to significant changes in the draft and the displacement of the ship, as we can see here by this little table, showing the ship as designed in 1916, next, and then as redesigned and completed in 1920. Her displacement had risen by almost 5,000 tons. Next. And she would now be 3 feet deeper in the water, which of course gave rise to problems right aft when she was always a wet ship because of this. But importantly, she was now armored on the same scale as that of a battleship. So going back to Royal Oak, for example, she was she was armored on the same scale as that ship, giving rise to HMS Hood actually being probably what was termed the first fast battleship. Next. The photographs are quite exceptional, and out of the chaos of deindustrialization, when lots of photographs and records of famous companies were lost, we are very fortunate that those of John Brown and Company have survived. And currently, most of these records are contained by or held by Glasgow University and also by the National Records of Scotland in Edinburgh. So the photographs that you're about to see are from that collection. They are mostly 10 by 12 and 12 by 15 glass plate negatives, and the quality is just absolutely stunning, as I hope you get to see from the photographs that follow. Anyway, so next. HMS Hood was a riveted ship, unlike today's ships, which are all welded. And riveting in those days inevitably meant either two men, each with a hammer, hitting a rivet successively, a left hand and then a right hand, with lots of people whom you can't see here holding rivets and doing all sorts of things underneath the decks. Next. Or they used a pneumatic riveting tool, such as you see this young man here using at Clydebank. The pneumatic riveting tool was a very recent invention and meant that just one riveter was required to close the rivet. These riveting hand tools were very heavy, thus this structure to try and take some of the weight off to enable to prevent the riveter having some sort of fatigue after a short while. Next. So this is the first ever photograph of HMS Hood, taken on the 5th of September, just 5 days after the keel was laid. There is no photograph of the keel laying, and it shows quite significant progress in the ship just in these 5 days. Next. This photograph, taken in the same day, shows the midship section of the double bottom, and it shows how progress had been made. And partly this was because if you look in this photograph over to the right, you can see there are some sections there which already have been riveted with angle iron, and this would be done in the plater's shed and then brought down. So a lot of pre-assembly had been done in the shops before it was actually laid down. The other thing to say about this is that this structure that you're looking at here hasn't actually been riveted. It's been bolted together. And once it's been bolted together and faired and made true, that's when the riveters come in. Next. This is a detail of that photograph and shows a couple of rivet fires, and the rivet fires you see here on the planks were where the rivets were heated and then thrown to whichever riveter required them, and thus the riveting would begin. Next. At this time, only 197 men were employed in Hood, just 3.7% of the workforce. Next. While work was in progress at Clydebank, quite a lot of material had to be ordered from outside the yard. All the armor, the main armament and the armament systems would all come from elsewhere. The main armament would come from Barrow-in-Furness, for example, but a lot of the castings would come from William Beardmore and Company in Glasgow. And this is a part of the stern frame seen here at the Parkhead Forge in Glasgow. Bearing the ship's number, just painted at you can see at the far end there at the extreme left, ship number 460. And this would then be transported down to Clydebank. It's been, the rivet holes have been cast into the job, as it were. And the next time we see this, next, is down at Clydebank. And this is the stern section of HMS Hood, and you can see that stern casting there, which John has just highlighted, and it's being pulled into position with the keel and the vertical keel sections of Hood. And next is a detail of this photograph, and you can see work there progressing. They're using a block and tackle and a turnbuckle, to pull this casting, which probably weighed something like 25 or 30 tons, pulling it up into position. It will then be faired by the shipwrights to make sure everything is true. And once that's been done, then it will be riveted into the structure of the ship. Next. In November, I beg your pardon, February 1917, then this message was sent to John Brown's to say that work on Hood should proceed with all dispatch. Now, all dispatch, of course, implies that it was to take place at great speed. This, in fact, couldn't happen for a number of reasons. But this was then more or less saying the redesign has substantially been completed, although it wouldn't be until August that the last of the redesigned drawings would be supplied to John Brown and Company. Next. This photograph on March 1917, looking right aft, shows some of the bulkheads that would separate the engine rooms. And if you look at the stern tube right aft there, yes, that's one of them. HMS Hood had 4 shafts, so this is just one shaft, the tube through which the propeller shaft will run. And the next image shows a detail of this area. And you notice this white grid structure sitting there. Now that's actually made up of light wooden strips and has been made by loftsmen and this template will be taken back up to the plater's shed, where a plate will be made to fit that shape exactly. And this is the template for making that plate, which has a compound shape. It's a curved plate. So that's partly how complex plates were made. Templates were taken for each individual one and then taken up to the shops to be made. Next. This photograph shows the increasing size of the ship on the stocks, and you get to some sense of just how big this ship is going to be. And we're at main deck level here. The 3 gentlemen are standing on the main deck, so there's still a significant number of decks to come above that. We're probably only about halfway up the hull. And if we look at the next image, which is a detail of these men, headgear was a very important way of deciding who was who in shipyards. The cloth bonnet, of course, was the workman. And then you had the trilbies or the Homburgs or whatever, the top hats and so on, would all identify different people. But these men are quite clearly managers of some sort, probably the shipyard manager, maybe some other directors, for example. And they made regular trips onto the ship just to see what progress was being made and to make a report back to the Admiralty. Next. This again shows the stern frame in situation now, but it also shows the huge amount of timber that was used in shipbuilding in those days in form of staging and props and so on. And if we look at the next image, the men who are standing up there, and we go to the next frame, we see just how precarious work on this ship was, and indeed in all ships and shipbuilding at this time. Very, very little attention was paid to safety. In fact, these men do have a plank that they can hold on to, but they're only standing on a very narrow ledge. And also you can see there are 2 other figures in here which are very blurry because all these photographs are time exposures. Next. This image is looking at boilers being lowered into the hull on the stocks. Hood had 24 Yarrow boilers. This is where the steam was raised. And these boilers were lowered into the hull and then slid along inside the ship to their final location. Next. Again, a general view along the main deck of the ship. We still have a couple of decks to go above that. And you can see again the scale of the ship, and just some of the, by this time, thousands of men who are working on this contract, doing various things. You'll also note that quite a lot of the plates are marked as loose, and you can tell by that these are plates which will be removed at some point to allow the passage of trunking or pipe work or whatever before being reattached and finally riveted. Note also just the sheer number of markings and letters and numbers and all the different components, which was the real secret of putting a ship like this together, where there was literally hundreds of thousands of parts. Next. This photograph shows a heavy armored plate being lifted by a series of A-frames or sheer legs, which have been stepped onto the deck of the ship to hoist this very heavy plate up, perhaps weighing between 30 and 40 tons. And it's going to be fitted to the structure behind it, which you can see with all the holes and the numbers. Armor was bolted to the substructure of the ship. And these holes, which you can see top left there, are the holes through which the bolts will pass to secure the armor to the structure of the ship. Next. A view of the side of the ship, the port side of the ship, and showing the bulge, which I identified earlier, being constructed. But once again, if we look at the next slide, and the three workers standing on this very narrow ledge next, again, it points to the very precarious nature of shipbuilding. And what you can't hear here, of course, is the sheer noise that would be in the shipyard at this time, with innumerable riveting guns going and hammering and so on. So you don't get the sense of the atmosphere of it, but you do see the precarious nature of working on ships like this. These men are probably standing 30 feet up off the ground at this point. Next. This image is looking at the after end of the ship, and here are the barbettes. The barbettes are the circular, heavily armed structures upon which the turrets will sit. The one right aft has already had its armor fitted, which is 12 inches thick, whereas the one nearest the camera is still waiting to have its armor fitted. Next. In wartime, it was the practice by the British government to have propaganda meetings in all the factories and shipyards in the United Kingdom. And this is one taking place in May in 1918 at Clydebank. And it's General Jan Smuts, no less, who would subsequently become the Prime Minister of South Africa. And he was a member of the British War Cabinet, and he's encouraging the workers at Clydebank, together with a series of other people from the armed forces and elsewhere, he's exhorting them to further production and increased production in the interests of the war effort. Next. This, I thought, was a remarkable photograph, and although nothing quite to do with HMS Hood, it is John Brown's shipyard. HMS Hood is just behind the camera. But it does show the pressure on shipbuilders to produce merchant ships, arguably more important at this stage in the war, given the losses that were being sustained in the Atlantic to U-boat operations. So building merchant ships was every bit as important as warships, and as I say, arguably more so. And one of the reasons why Hood's three sisters had by this time been suspended was because they just simply couldn't afford the labor, or to take the labor away from other ships to build them. That was just one of the reasons. But this photograph shows the liner Ormond up left, all camouflage painted, being fitted out as a troop ship, and a merchant ship there, which is, its prop is turning. They're doing a basin trial of the machinery. The propeller is turning. But most interesting of all, I think, are the young sailors just waiting to join HMS Vanquisher, the destroyer, which you can see there at the bottom left. And what I thought was very interesting was immediately behind these young sailors who are being addressed by their superiors, there are torpedo warheads lying there. And further over to the right, there are the mines that this ship are going to be carrying. And just slightly up from the mines, you can see the kit bags, a very personal touch. Kit bags, and the detail that this photograph shows, there's all sorts of things. There are boxes and packages from parents and God knows what, accompanying these young men as they prepare to join their first ship. Next. Oh, I do beg your pardon. Here is the detail. And you can see the warheads, the torpedo warheads behind the young men and the mines over there to the right. Oh, it's a terrific photograph, and these men are all being addressed and being prepared to go on board their ship. Next. Back to HMS Hood, and looking forward this time, the very tall circular structure to the right is the conning tower, and once fitted with its armour, this weighs something in the region of 600 tons. Forward of that is B barbette, and a plate is being manipulated across into position there. And slightly forward of that again is A barbette. And finished deck height is, you can see forward the framing just forward of the forecastle, that is the finished deck height. So what we're looking at there, closer to the camera, is not the finished deck height or the weather deck height. Next. Just a close-up of B barbette and work in progress there. And again, just to give you some sort of idea of the general conditions that men were working in. Right over to the left-hand side, you can see the frames with these knee joints at the top of them. I don't know whether you can highlight that, John, just these frames. Yes, that's it. And that is the weather deck. That will be the final height of the decks on the hull of the ship. And center bottom of shot, if we go to these two gentlemen there, if we go to the next photograph. And I had an uncle who was a plater, and I would show him photographs like this, and I would say, what in heck's name are these two men doing? What's going on there? And he would say, they're simply trying to make themselves heard because it's just so damn noisy. Next. So by July 1918, month before the Hood would be launched, there's now, you can see this is the number of men working on the Hood, representing just about a third of the workforce at Clydebank. Next. Looking right aft, she's still on the stocks here. The shafts are in position, the propellers have been fitted, and the deck is being planked. This is the quarter deck, and we have a detail of this coming up, just to show some pretty familiar tools here. The decks were all the finest teak, typically 2.5 to 3 inches thick, and these craftsmen are making just the most wonderful job of fitting these decks together. You can recognize some of the tools, brace and bit and various hammers and planes and so on. And these pipes they're running across their elevated pipes, of course, are carrying compressed air for power tools. Next. And this view looking aft, shortly before the ship would be launched, shows the structure just below the shafts there and the propellers. Yes, this long structure going right there is called a poppet, and it's a cradle, and there were 4 of them, and I think we'll see more of these in a minute, and they're intended to keep the ship upright as it's launched, as it slides down the slipway. You don't want it to fall to either side, and these poppets were there for that purpose. Also in this photograph, you can see the deep recess where the armor will be fitted. Now, the side armor hasn't been fitted to Hood, principally because it would make her weight for launching excessive. So the side armor wasn't fitted until she was in the water. Next. The machinery, this is the machinery which will drive the ship. There's a series of turbines inside this major structure, which is a Brown Curtis turbine. Curtis turbines were American designs, but the John Brown Company modified them a little bit to make them suitable for Royal Navy purposes. Thus, they were called Brown Curtis turbines, but they are essentially of an American design. And there would be 4 of these, 1 for each shaft. And this one has been completely assembled and it's been wired up and plumbed up so they could run it gently in the shops, just to try and iron out any issues before it goes on the ship. It will then subsequently be broken down into component parts and then taken to the quayside and lowered into the ship. Craneage at Clydebank didn't go any greater than 150 tons. So while they could lift 150 tons, they couldn't lift the 300 or 400 or 500 tons, which this would weigh. Next. And this photograph shows a helical gear wheel. Now, once again, there would be 4 of these, 1 for each shaft, and it's on a trestle here being balanced just to make sure it's perfectly in balance. So when it goes into the ship, it will run perfectly. And this, of course, is a casting which has been machined. And this also would weigh something in the region of maybe 40 tons. Next. And this is another view right aft, and it's a further detail showing this poppet, this construction. Various metal bits of bracket have been riveted to the side of the ship, which will subsequently be removed, but these are there with this wooden structure, which will slide with the ship down into the river as it's being launched. Because these are time exposures, I think I'm pretty certain the cameraman has said to these men, please would you stand still for a couple of seconds while I make this exposure. I think that's it. I don't think they're necessarily gobsmacked by seeing a photographer, even though the cameras were gigantic in those days. Next. And this is just an interesting photograph looking right aft underneath the propellers and the shafts there. And you can see this massive structure, this palm structure, which links the shaft or joins the shaft to the hull, and all the huge number of rivets that are required to fasten that, make sure it's very rigid. And you can see the ship's rudder right aft there as well. Also, you can see the rural setting of John Brown Shipyard, one of the most heavily industrialized part of the river on one side. On the other side, it was all green fields and cows and all this kind of thing, and really quite idyllic and quite a contrast. Next. There's something strange about seeing a ship sitting on the ground like this, and here is HMS Hood, clearly a very, very large ship, towering above the buildings in the shipyard. And in this one, you can see the forward poppet there, this forward structure, which is going to keep the ship upright. A little bit up, John, just below that crane there, you can see the crisscross of the steelwork and the woodwork, and this is the poppet there. And also you can see the guy ropes which held these shipyard cranes in place. These cranes could only lift 5 tons. They could be moved, but they were held in place by these guy ropes. Next. Looking at the stern of the ship, again, this is, I think, the day of our launch. And if you look along the side, you can see this area, the darker area where the various tiers of armor will be fitted. But also it gives you some ideas of the very, very attractive lines that this ship had. Next. And here is the forward poppet on the starboard side, and also the drag chains. Now, these chains were assembled and organized the way you see them there, and attached to the side of the ship's hull by wires. And once the ship started to go down the slipway and enter the water, then these these cables would pull on the drag chains, and the drag chains were the principal means of bringing the ship to a halt. I mean, you don't want it careering right across and hitting the other side, so they had to stop it, and this was the principal means for doing that, the drag chains. But also in this photograph, you can see a part of HMS Hood's armament, which was torpedoes. She did carry torpedoes, and you can see that opening there, which was where torpedoes could be discharged from through that. Once it was opened, it could be discharged sideways, if you like. And of course, this torpedo tube would be below water. Next. So on the 22nd of August, the ship was launched. Somewhat late. Originally, it had been hoped the ship would be completed by the end of 1918, but that clearly wasn't going to happen. One of the main delays being the manufacture of her main armament, which was seriously delayed at Barrow and Furness. Next. Again, a well-known but nevertheless remarkable photograph of the ship, almost 900 feet long, lying on the ground there at John Brown's shipyard, just waiting. You can see the launching platform has been built right at the bow there, the white bit of the roof of that structure. And that's where Lady Hood will stand to launch the ship. And the shipyard is being tidied up and made good for the launch. Next. And this is a photograph of that event. The ship was named after Rear Admiral Horace Hood, who lost his life on board his flagship Invincible at the Battle of Jutland. So his widow was invited along to launch this ship in his name. Next. So weighing something in the region of 20,000 tons, I can't remember the exact figure, HMS Hood is launched. And here you can see the vital job that the poppet is doing in keeping the ship upright. You can also see all the way the chains are connected to the drag chains to the side of the ship's hull. She's flying the John Brown house flag. She's a John Brown ship. She's not an Admiralty ship until she's completed and accepted. And in she goes. Next. And that's her almost completely in the water now. The tugs are standing by. And because this is a wartime launch, there are not that many people present. At the launch of Aquitania just a couple of years before, something in the region of 100,000 people attended the launch. And that would have been the same for this ship had it not been for wartime. Next. A similar view. Ship in the water. One of the virtues of the placement of the shipyard at Clydebank was it was adjacent to the River Cart, and HMS Hood has been launched to some extent, partially up the River Cart. And that's what enabled enormous ships like Hood and Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth, QE2, to be launched at Clydebank because the River Clyde isn't that wide. Next. This glass plate is broken, but it shows the ship being taken up by tugs. I think altogether there's about 6 tugs will be required to take her and move her into the fitting out basin. And of course, it's high tide. So you couldn't launch a ship just on any day. And one as large as the Hood had to wait until the tide was very high. Next. This photograph I included because it shows the very, very fine lines of this ship, such a beautiful hull. But it also shows the torpedo bulges haven't been completed yet. And these bulges will be faired up into the hull. And I think there may be some photographs will be coming where we see that happening. But there she is, she's flying the Union flag and John Brown's house flag and afloat at last. Next. She's in the fitting out basin here, and we're on the upper deck, and you can see various pieces of items, piece of machinery that looks like pumps are being lowered into the open, the loose plates have been moved away. so that all manner of equipment can be lowered into the hull. And you can see the conning tower at the forward end there is in place. Next. And the men at the bottom center of this photograph are streaming into the superstructure, which is starting to take shape. And various things such as fridges, well, not fridges, cabinets and all sorts of things will be going in here just to equip the ship. Next. And this shows a strake of armor. There were 3 strakes down the side of the ship. And this shows, I think, probably the middle, the 8-inch strake being fitted to the side of the hull. And you can see all the various fittings that have been attached to the side of the hull just to secure it to the quay side. And you can see here the plating at the bottom, just at the underside of the bottom side of the armor is starting to be fared into the side of the ship, but you needed to have the armor in place before you could complete that plate work. Next. So this is the torpedo bulge being fared up, being plated up into the side of the ship. There you see the armor belt again. It says 460 and it's plate 28 starboard. And this young man standing between these 2 frames is testimony to the fact that John Brown workers were absolutely scrupulously clean, because if we go to the next slide, we can see that he's got a brush and pan set there, and he's clearing out this little small compartment he's standing in, which will be filled full of tubes called crushing tubes. And these tubes were there to, again, take up the explosive forces of a torpedo should it be hit. Next. This photograph shows the foremast, the pre-assembled foremast being lifted on board by the derrick crane, and the after of the 2 funnels is already in position. And there's a whole massive material lying at the quayside waiting to go on board. Next. This shows a couple of armor plates being lifted on board forward. These armor plates are for this barbette, B barbette. Next. This is a detail of that shot, I think. And you can see the groove down the side of the armor plates is where they were keyed in. These armor plates were all very carefully manufactured to fit one to the other, and a steel wedge would be put down that slot to key the armor plates in together. Next. An interesting photograph showing hundreds of men coming off the ship. The photograph is timed at 5:15 precisely. Why they took the photograph, I'm not sure, but it's interesting. It shows all these men coming off at the end of a shift. Next. And this is the first of our 15-inch guns going on. It's on X turret, so all sorts of people from Barrow and Furness would have been coming up just to make sure this was done correctly. There have been naval people there as well, just supervising the fitting of this gun. Next. And this is what, of course, HMS Hood was all about. These are the after 2 15-inch turrets. But you also see how low this part of the ship was, and there wasn't a lot of she was so deep in the water by this time with all this additional weight. You can see the problems that were going to come in this after part of the ship. So a very reduced freeboard here. Next. This is the forward part of the ship with most of the forward structure now in place. And you can see that the forward turrets are being built up. The turrets are just awaiting the side walls and the turret roofs and so on to complete it. But you can also see how badly streaked the hull is. She really does need to be painted. And this was something that wasn't going to happen in Clydebank because John Brown were more than keen to get Hood out the way because they'd so much other work to take her place. Next. And now, just to finish off, there's a series of photographs showing the ship completed at Clydebank, with the crew aboard, but still lots of technicians and shipyard workers there. But some people taking possession of this great and mighty ship. I mean, look at these chaps standing on top of the rangefinder, the 30-foot rangefinder there on top of that tower. It's quite something, and they must have felt absolutely wonderful about being on a ship of this size. Next. Again, these photographs, I think, just make the point. The photographer, again, saying, please hold your positions while I take this photograph. But they're just interesting details showing the secondary armament of the ship. But just this overwhelming sense that they had completed something quite special. Next. And again, people drawn from various industries, having fitted equipment, whatever it may be, all present on this ship at the end. Next. And an interesting photograph of the ship showing her forward turrets at Clydebank. And the detail coming up next shows what's at the extreme left of this shot. And these young men, these sailors, again, having taken possession of this ship, the most powerful warship in the world, must have been quite a feeling. Next. As I say, the ship wasn't painted at John Brown's. They wanted to get rid of the ship as quickly as they could. So the ship was, when she sailed from Clydebank, she went to Rosyth, where some finishing touches were applied. Next. The ship's boats and the secondary armament. Next. Yeah, and again, I don't know, I'm just adding words to this, but I think what a terrific sense of achievement having built a ship like this, and these men, workers and crew alike, feeling quite special. Next. And this wonderfully atmospheric ship, beg your pardon, photograph of the ship being taken from the fitting out basin at Clydebank there, ready to go down the Clyde. Next. Very evocative, smoke and steam filled imagery with this great ship being turned into the river channel. Next. And just in the last few minutes, if I could just read out a comment that was written by a reporter at the time who was observing this happening. And he says, and he's writing for a local newspaper, and he says that once the ship had been aligned in the channel in the river, it said, a few seconds later, the Hood, having gathered way, gave 3 ear-piercing blasts on her siren as a farewell to Clydebank, and the journey to the sea began. And here she is just passing John Brown's shipyard at the extreme right and approaching William Beardmore's huge naval shipyard on the Clyde on her way down river. And this reporter goes on to say that far away, the Hood was broadside on and showed to perfection the long, low lines of the hull with the great powerful thrust of the bow and the cutaway cruiser stern, lines as graceful as those of a warship can be. The best picture of all, however, was the 3/4 silhouette shown as the ship swung into the winding channel, the massive upper works on the foredeck, from the great guns to the navigating turret, were then in the eye, presenting a magnificent spectacle. He was probably the first person to commit to words compliments about the attractiveness of this ship and just how handsome she was. Next. As I said, the ship went to Rosyth for about 3 months just to be painted and to have some other items fitted. She then came back to the Clyde and ran her trials. This would be March 1920, and here she's doing turning trials, probably going flat out at 30, 32 knots, Next. And what a thrill ride for this officer standing at the stern of this, the most powerful warship in the world, hurtling through the seas at 32 knots. What a thrill, absolutely staggering. Next. Another photograph of this ship running trials. And the last photograph, quite a well-known one. She developed 150,000 shaft horsepower to take her through the seas at 32 knots. But just look at what a sight. Eloquent testimony to British naval might, HMS Hood. Thank you very much indeed. So thank you for listening to that. I hope you found that interesting. It's always exciting for me to tell the story of the building of this great ship.
Thank you so much, Ian, for a fascinating presentation. I mean, what a phenomenal effort, you know, and what a fascinating process seeing that stage by stage. We've got a number of questions that have come in from the YouTube chat.
Okay.
Let's have a wee look at those. One YouTube viewer asks, was all the steel for the armour sourced locally? And what was the specification and how did they ensure it was up to spec?
Well, first of all, the armour came from 4 different locations across the UK. A lot of it came from Sheffield. Some of it came from Glasgow. These are where the main armour plants were in the UK at that time. A trial plate was always made first, and it would be taken to a place like Shrewsbury-in-Hesse, for example, and they would fire shells at it just to make sure that it was up to spec. So the composition of the steel used to make the armor plates was tested, yes.
Gosh, thank you. We've got another question here from one viewer, and they go on to say, the whole process of building HMS Hood from receipt of order to completion took less than 4 years. Was that the standard timing for building such a ship at that time, or was it speeded up during the war?
No, it wasn't speeded up. It was actually slowed down. The preceding battle cruiser, which admittedly wasn't as large, HMS Repulse, was built in 20 months. So HMS Hood at 4 years took a long time to build, and this was partly because of the delay in the redesign, and also because of delays in manufacturing the armament, the main armament for the ship. British war industries were under great pressure to provide all manner of stuff, and it wasn't easy to build ships as quickly as they would have liked. But typically a battleship or a battle cruiser may have taken maybe 2 years, 2.5 years to build. So HMS Hood was actually very slow to build.
Gosh, fascinating, you know, it took so long, gosh. We've got time for perhaps one more question, and I'm really sorry. I'm afraid we're going to have to close this session for today. But I think we could spend all day here. I'm sure. We've got another question from a YouTube viewer asking: were there any health and safety records kept of how many workers were seriously injured or even lost their lives during the build?
Yes, yes, there were. I mean, while health and safety simply wasn't an issue, not even a concept in those days, the shipyard did employ a doctor. And quite frequently, of course, he was called on because there's all manner of injuries. Relatively few fatalities by the time of HMS Hood, but in decades gone past, there were a lot of fatalities. And shipyards in those days had their own ambulance, believe it or not, so they could take men very quickly, horse-drawn, in this case, to the Western Infirmary in Glasgow, where they could be treated. And they reckoned they could do that in about 10 minutes. But of course, they'd be the only thing on the road in those days. But no, they did keep records, and you can still to this day check up on these records.
Fantastic. Well, I'm afraid we're going to have to close the questions, but just thank you so much, Ian, for a fascinating talk, and really good to have at least a few questions from our viewers answered today. And thank you so much. Oh, thank you so much for giving your time to us today.
It was my pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And of course, a thank you to everybody in the audience for participating and coming to watch this event today. And of course, thank you to all the technical team behind the scenes enabling this to go ahead. And I'll just let you know about our upcoming events. Next event is HMS Hood to Australia, which begins at 3:30, which is sure to be another captivating talk, and that is with Graeme Lunn. So hopefully see you shortly for that presentation as well. You can check out the event programme for the YouTube, links to all tomorrow's webcasts as well. And for now, good afternoon and goodbye, and thank you for watching.